Hello, everybody. Today we are going to be talking about why it's a good idea to take risks. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about taking risks today. So this is kind of a general strategy for making art and really for innovation in general. And it's a strategy based on taking risks and being smart about when and how you take risk. Personally, I'm in the midst of trying out this strategy in a certain extent, so it may well end up not paying off. And, that sometimes happens with risk. That's what makes it risk. But it's still worth doing. And I'll explain why in a little bit. So, this discussion is a bit of a jump off from two of my previous videos. If you want a little bit more context, you can check out my Why I Quit My Dream Job and Why I Make Comics videos. In general, there are two strategies for making and marketing art. So, one, you can look at what's been successful and do something similar. Or two, you can make something no one has ever seen before. So, strategy one makes lots of sense, and it's a strategy most of the large corporations I worked with followed. You want to find an investment that gives you the best return for the least amount of risk. And this is also the concept that Facebook and mobile gaming took to absurd lengths. For a while, when I was at EA, we worked on a Facebook game based on Risk, which is, ironically enough, our topic today. And it was a fascinating introduction to the thinking behind metrics based gaming. Now, I'm not an expert, so you guys may want to correct me, but the overall idea with metrics based gaming is that you make a game and you have all these metrics to pay attention to what people do in the game, and you can adjust the game according to those metrics to increase the chance of gamers doing the stuff you want them to do and to do the stuff that would lead them to pay you money. The problem for me with metric based gaming and with copying other successes is that it creates this positive feedback loop. And positive not in the sense that it's good in that kind of qualitative sense, but positive in the sense that one action kind of leads to another action, which leads back to the original action. You kind of keep repeating the same patterns. People respond in a predictable way, and then you use that data to repeat the same patterns again. You're just kind of going in this loop. And in a sense, this is, human nature. I understand why people do this. You repeat what it works. If you find a spot along the river that gives you lots of fish, you're going to keep going back to that spot to fish. If I discover that pretending I'm outfitting my son with War Machine armor helps him to put his clothes on in the morning, I'm going to repeat that strategy until it stops working. The problem is that there are many cycles of habit and repetition that people engage in that are compulsive, unhealthy, and soul destroying. And, playing Facebook games happens to be one of them. But a lot of life is filled with kind of those compulsions and those loops that can be kind of, horrible and depressing. One of the loftier purposes of art is to break people out of patterns, to give them new ways of thinking, new ways of looking at the world, and offer hope in the midst of a bleak existence. So this gets us to strategy two, that besides being a much nobler way of making art, also offers some distinct strategic advantages to strategy number one. In short, big risks offer the chance for big returns. So if you want an example of a body of work that everyone is trying to copy now, you don't have to look any further than Raina Telgemeier. I love her work. It's sincere, it's heartfelt, it's really well done comic storytelling. And her books also happen to be like ridiculously successful. And the thing is, Raina didn't start out trying to copy some other success. Smile, which was her first breakaway hit, started as an autobiographical webcomic. And you can really say the same thing about probably any really big transformative hit. Think about Star Wars or The Matrix or Harry Potter. These weren't really the case of artists trying to jump on a trend or try to read demographic data and see what they could sell. These were all, artists putting together original stories that were created out of the passion of the authors trying to create something original, unique, and from the heart. And then they blew up, and why did they blow up? They blew up precisely because they weren't trying to follow a certain trend or fit in a market. They blew up because they each created a new trend and new markets. And that's really the key insight here. Following a trend puts a ceiling on your success. The market is already there, it's well defined. It's also probably already saturated with competition. You aren't doing anything or following any trend that everyone else isn't already aware of. So creating something new means taking a risk, but it also means the possibility of creating an entirely untapped new market. In Raina's case, she opened this huge market for young girls and women that had never really been exploited before. Before this time, no one would have ever predicted that there would be millions of dollars to be made making comic books for girls. So, does this mean if you take a big risk and make something original that you'll be guaranteed success? No. As a matter of fact, most of us won't find success on the level of Reina. That's almost guaranteed, but you may find a greater personal success than you might have if you just tried to follow a trend. At the very least, you're going to set yourself apart. And even if you have no commercial success with the work you create, it still might be worth it. I've gone into length about why that might be and why I make comics, but the short story is that the greatest satisfaction you can find in making art doesn't necessarily come from a paycheck. All right, now let's put that idea of failure aside and talk again about increasing the chance of taking a risk that is going to pay off. One of my former Disney colleagues, Sam Nielsen, has this way of looking at marketability and personal interests that I really like. So he draws a Venn diagram where one circle is the stuff you like to draw, and the other circle is the stuff you can sell. And the intersection of those two circles is the stuff you should do. So I think that's a really great, way to guide the decisions you make. And the real question, though, is how do you find where that intersection is? And like I said, by copying a trend, there may be some obvious places where those two areas intersect. But there may be areas of intersection there that haven't been explored yet. There may be something you love that other people will love. It's just that no one has ever done the work of selling that idea and proving that people want it or exploring that market. And this is where you have to be smart about the risk that you take. I heard this great interview once, and I wish I could remember who it was with, and I've tried in vain to track it down. So if this sounds familiar to you, please help me figure this out. But the guest made a really fantastic point about solving problems. He framed problems as basically questions to be answered. And as he approached different problems, the first question he asked was, what is the cheapest, and that includes quickest, way that I can answer this question? So think about figuring out this question of, is there something I'm interested in that other people could be interested in? What is the quickest and the cheapest way that you can answer that question? And that's the smartest way to take a risk. You don't need to finish a 300-page comic epic and then put it out on the internet before you know if people will like it. If you have an idea and you don't know that people will like it, find a cheap and quick way that you can figure out if it appeals to people. Create 5 pages and send that to publishers and see what they think. Or even better, create 5 pages and put it online and get people's response. In this way, your risk is much less, or the better way to put it is just that you are risking less to answer that question. You have a chance to test the water before committing more and more resources to the venture. In my particular case, I had a number of questions I set out to answer when I started the mini comic of Green Monk. I wanted to know if my art resonated outside of my circle of friends and family. Well, I wanted to know if it even resonated within my friends and family. I wanted to know if I could tell a story successfully. It had been about 3 years since I graduated from film school, where I had completed a 20-minute senior film with a budget of over $20,000. I still wanted to make movies, but I was frustrated with being unable to finish a script, so I decided to try something smaller. It just so happened at this time that I had worked for this scrappy independent illustration and animation house for a couple of years, and had been put through really the refiner's fire of trying to create creative, high quality animation for very, very absurdly low budgets. So, 20,000 was totally absent from my way of thinking at this point. I mean, we had such tight budgets that we would sit down and plan out a project and say, I have an hour to design characters, I have 2 hours to build the characters and rig them, and then we have, X amount of hours to actually do the animation. It was literally that tight of a budget on lots of things. But the great thing about it is that put me in the mindset to make a small, inexpensive mini comic that told a simple story. I did it all in black and white, so it would be way cheaper to print. I found a really good price on printing too, which my wife helped me with. And I spent the next several months working on it every night for a little bit until I had finished my first comic. I didn't have to quit my job. It didn't interrupt family time. It helped that I didn't have kids back then. And I had a little sample of my storytelling abilities when I was done. So when I was done, I took the comic and went to as many conventions as I could cram in a year. I beat the pavement on social media and started to meet other people in the industry. When I was done, I had answered some good questions. In 2011, it was selected as one of YALSA's great graphic novels for teens, and then selected for their top 10 list. And it was the only book that was self-published to be on that list. And it was also nominated for a couple of other cool awards and got a really good review from me at Cool News. So I got an answer to my question for a pretty reasonable price. I felt I had enough reason to believe that my art would resonate with a larger audience. And part of the reason why it worked is because I told a full story within the comic, which is really important. So it probably wouldn't have worked as well if I tried to test out an idea for an epic comic with 5 or 10 pages, because you just wouldn't have been able to see the full story arc. And it's not like the questions that the Green Monk mini comic answered gave me a guarantee for success if I went forward. They just opened up the possibility that it could work. I could still fail. I still have a lot of work to do to answer other questions. I still have to answer the question, can I make a living making my comics? I still haven't really done that yet. But that's the question I'm going to try and answer. Of course, my personal finances are a big part of making it possible to take this risk. And I'd be really interested in discussing that in a future video. So if you guys think that would be interesting to know what my personal finances are and how they allow me to take these risks, please let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. I hope I've provided some insight on taking risks. If you liked the video, please subscribe. I'll talk to you next time.